One of our slogans is understand anything. Like that's, whatever you give it, Notebook will help you make sense of that material in whatever modality you want.
Welcome to the Made by Google podcast, where we meet the people who work on the Google products you love. Here's your host, Rachid Finge.
Welcome to another deep dive. That's right, we're talking NotebookLM today, together with Stephen Johnson, the editorial director of NotebookLM, and Simon Tokumine, director of product management at Google Labs.
This is the Made by Google podcast.
Stephen, Simon, welcome to the Made by Google podcast. Stephen, you studied semiotics at Brown University. You wrote extensively about innovation networks. So how does an author end up at Google pioneering a tool like NotebookLM?
I was writing about technology. I've always been an enthusiast with technology. I did a couple of tech startups when I was younger. So I was just always very interested in how I could use software to help me think and organize my ideas and to write the books. And so I'd been an early adopter of a lot of different kind of note-taking tools and writing tools, and I'd written about the way I was using the tools and things like that. And in the early days of Google Labs, just almost exactly 3 years ago, Clay Bavor, who was running Labs back then, and Josh Woodward, who now runs Labs, they'd been reading my stuff for years, actually, read a couple of my books, and they knew about this obsession of mine. And I guess at some point, Clay said to Josh, we should get Stephen to come do a talk at Labs, and his whole worldview is kind of an inspiration for what Labs should be, and, he's interested in software. And apparently Josh was like, what if we got him to come and actually join Google and build something? Because he's obsessed with, writing and research tools, and we've got these new language models that are just so amazing. Maybe we can do something. And so they cold called me out of the blue and said, would you have any interest in coming? And we have a small team that can help you prototype some ideas. And because I'm not an idiot, I said, yes, I would like to do that. And I think I met Simon maybe 3-4 weeks into my tenure there. I was initially part-time.
By the way, it's so funny. It's so funny, Stephen, by the way. I think I was just new to Labs. And when I joined Labs, to me, you'd been in Labs forever.
Yeah, I was an old timer.
This guy's been here forever. Wow, he knows everyone. But it's funny to hear it's only 3 weeks. That's the first time I've learned that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then Simon, you joined Google 10 years ago. So you saw that transition from sort of mobile first to AI first and now working on large language models. So what is your driving force and how does that apply to, working on NotebookLM?
Yeah. So I joined Google, like you said, it was 2013, so a bit over 10 years ago now. But I joined just as Android was really getting off the ground and really getting traction. I worked on the Google Search app. So, my journey there kind of went from standing up a brand new mobile app and having a ton of fun on that to really kind of getting deep into almost like the origins of curiosity. Where does the desire to learn something new come from? And so when I moved to Labs, Josh and I were old friends from back in my search days. And at the time we were building, there was an idea that we'd build a large language model API. And then following that, I talked to Josh a bit and was sort of planning my next move. I kind of do things in 2-year increments. And we sort of realized, well, hey, the models look like they're on track. They look good. That we sort of know roughly where they're going, but where are all the products? So I started thinking through what are the opportunities for information to come at people that are different from just a simple chatbot. And that led to a ton of investigations and lots of failed prototypes that I won't bore you with here. But one of them that made it through was this notion of what we now call audio overviews. Can we make kind of engaging dialogue between multiple AI hosts to really guide you, the listener, through an information space? And so the idea was that one of the hosts is almost you, so they're the one that are asking the questions, like automatically prompting the model in a sense. And the expert is guiding you through the information.
I'm just concerned about this news that Simon works only for 2 years on a project. So I just want to know, when do you consider your clock starting in Notebook? Because I need to start planning if you're moving on, man.
Maximum, I've been on it for a year, I think is probably fair to say at this point.
Okay, good to know. I'm going to enter this in my calendar right now.
Still some runway left, fortunately. And we'll talk about audio overviews in a minute for sure. But let's go back to NotebookLM and its essence itself, because everyone that I know who uses it has a slightly different description of what the product is. So just wondering, Stephen, Simon, if someone asks you, what is NotebookLM, what is your sort of 1 or 2 sentence answer?
Yeah, I think one of the really nice things is that we had just hit on when we started really talking in earnest about integrating audio overviews and working really with Simon and that team is we'd hit on this framing of Notebook as a tool for understanding things. Like that was kind of clarifying because it was big enough to describe the ambition we had for this project. I mean, I think in the early days, there were sometimes people would be like, is this for students? Is this for journalists? Is this for, people wanted it to have this very narrow focus. And I think maybe naively, because I hadn't been at Google for very long, I was like, I think it's bigger than those things. Like, I think we should not narrow the focus on it. We should be ambitious with this project. And then eventually we hit on this idea that, like, look, there's so many different user journeys that involve trying to understand complex material in whatever form it is. So if you're a writer and you're trying to understand the research material for the book you're writing, sure, that's great. If you're a student trying to understand the material for a course you're taking, if you're a marketer trying to digest information about the business that you're promoting to turn it into a press release or an ad campaign, that's another kind of understanding. When you looked at the market, there was a big opening there, we felt like. There were a lot of tools that helped you kind of specifically create in specific formats, like you need to make a slide deck. Well, we have a tool for that. But a tool that was really oriented from the ground up around finding insights and going deeper and exploring and making new connections in material, like that seemed like a kind of a blank spot on the map that was nonetheless really important for people, and that language models we could sense were going to be very, very good as guides for that journey. When we first started thinking about this, the models weren't quite up to speed in a way. I mean, there's a great moment when we rolled out Gemini 1.5, which was right before we announced audio overviews. And I remember seeing Simon, I don't know if you remember this, in the micro kitchen, and you came up to me and you said, "Notebook finally works." It was just like we'd been kind of building ahead of the models a little bit, like we've been building the application around the idea that the models were going to catch up in their ability to analyze and interpret and make sense of things for the user. So that's, one of our slogans is understand anything. Like that's, whatever you give it, Notebook will help you make sense of that material in whatever modality you want.
Simon, do you sort of remember the first thing that you asked within NotebookLM where you got an answer that was like, yes, it works, as Stephen just described? Do you remember what kind of things you were trying out?
I do remember the first time I used it. It was when Stephen showed me the very early prototype that we had that didn't look anything like the notebook of today. When it was much more of a, for some reason, Stephen, it was more of a writer's tool,
yep.
And I'm not entirely sure why. Yeah, I wonder why that was.
Suspicious, yeah.
No, but in addition to what Stephen just said, I think the one thing that really sets Notebook apart is its ability to work over material that you provide it. So, for example, like, as you can tell, I'm not a US citizen, but things relating to the US tax code, for example, that are important for me to get exactly right, or that are related to the fact that I am both, I have to think about the US and the UK at the same time and that type of thing. So I think anytime you have something that needs to be grounded on information that's maybe not necessarily broadly available, or anytime you're working with information and knowledge in a way where you need to accumulate more of that information over time, Notebook is just a perfect fit.
I had a really interesting one. I haven't even told you this, Simon, because it happened basically last night. But I had just a wonderful Notebook moment. So there's a very talented screenwriter who's trying to adapt one of my books to turn it into a TV show. And he had sent me the script for the first episode, and so I was giving him kind of notes on the script. And I had this idea for an opening scene for the kind of next episode. And I just wanted to kind of like give him a quick sense of what I didn't want to do his work for him because I'm not a screenwriter. I don't know how to do that stuff, but I wanted to give him a sense of what it could be. And so I just loaded into Notebook like his draft of episode 1, the entire text of my book. And then I just said, hey, Notebook, like write the opening scene of the next episode in the style of that episode that I've just given you based on the facts in my book. And here's a paragraph long description of what I want in this scene. And it was like, whoop, here you go. And it was a little bit off, so I was like, that's good, but change the ending a little bit. Whoop, here you go. And I just pasted that in the email, and I said, hey, I'm not trying to do your job for you. I wrote this with an AI, but this gives you a sense of what I'm thinking here. And the speed with which I was able to get to that vision and convey it to someone else versus trying to write out that scene myself, I don't know, it was 10 times faster. And I got to basically like as good a result as I think I would have gotten if I'd done it myself.
Right, so it's getting more insights, learn faster based on your own sources. And I remember when NotebookLM got sort of announced when it was still called Project Tailwind at I.O. in 2023, I think. That was sort of what people thought, like, oh, it's like Gemini, but it's only for my own documents. I think that's sort of the idea that caught fire. So Project Tailwind, why was it called that? Who came up with that? What does it even mean?
That was Adam, the engineer I mentioned. We had an early kind of like, what are we going to call this? And Adam, it was exactly as what Simon was saying, that it had a little bit more of a writing component, which maybe someday we will get back to, but whatever, we'll see about that. And the idea was that you would use it and feel as if there was kind of like the wind was at your back. And, the software is just helping you write and think in a very fluid way without having to kind of fight against it. And it was a great code name for it.
Amazing. And that started in 2022, right? Like sort of only 1 year before it got some sort of public appearance.
Yeah, we built the original prototype. We started sharing with folks in October of 2022.
I guess with any product you could build, but especially NotebookLM, you sort of have, and Stephen, you alluded to it, a sort of an audience in mind. You probably have some use cases in mind, but then of course you put it out in the real world and people do completely different things with them. Do you both have some sort of a favorite example of what you've seen people do with NotebookLM where you thought like, gosh, I never considered that could be useful. Our product could be useful in that context.
I mean, we could do a whole podcast on unexpected uses. I'll give one, Simon. I'm curious what yours would be. I mean, I think probably my favorite is the role-playing game enthusiasts, like Dungeons and Dragons. So it turns out that like all those role-playing games are very like textual, right? They involve, you can write a campaign for your D&D game that's, 200 pages long, and it has this complex backstory and so on. And so people early on were like, oh, this is great. I can manage my campaigns and I can actually be the dungeon master for my game with like Notebook open next to me. And if I'm trying to remember like what was the palace where the orc was found and how many hit points did they have or whatever is happening in the fantasy role-playing game, they're able to just conjure up that information. And in fact, there was a group of folks in our Discord, which we have a wonderful Discord community, that were actually trying to hack Notebook and to turn it actually into a game platform so that you could actually play the games. And Simon and I have gone down a couple of like rabbit holes over the last year and try to figure out like, is there a playable version of NotebookLM that someday may happen? You can kind of make it work already now as it is, but yeah, that one was really fun to see.
Amazing. Simon, what is your favorite example?
I mean, a lot of mine are from the very latest things that we've shipped, but, we've just shipped international audio overviews. So
Yes.
audio overviews in over 75 languages. So one of the best ones that I've seen recently is a user in Japan actually uploaded, they were a knowledge worker, they were interested in finance, but they were also learning English. And so they loaded into Notebook a English language blog post, maybe about the financial report from company XYZ, whatever that happened to be. And they asked the Japanese audio overview hosts to host a language lesson using key phrases from the English language financial report so that they could basically bone up on the English financial language. And so when they play, they shared it on Twitter and all this kind of stuff, or on X rather. And it was this like amazing Japanese language audio overview where these hosts were actually kind of like debating, these very, 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 very specific and esoteric financial terms, and having a very engaged conversation about it. And I just sat there thinking, you know what, like, you're never going to go to, this lesson is never going to happen. This lesson would never have happened. Language lessons, if you've ever done them, and I'm sure you have, they're pretty dry, right? And they don't connect with you and your own interests. And this user was able to basically craft their own almost like professional grade language lesson based on a blog post that they'd found within their specialist domain. I just thought that was amazing. And we certainly didn't plan for that. So a lot of people don't know this, but if you load sources into Notebook in other languages to the Notebook, your system language, Notebook will just, Gemini under the hood, it just sees all languages as one language. You can have sources from France, from Germany, in English, in Japanese, Chinese, whatever, and you can be conversing or you can be generating mind maps or whatever in your language. And that's the thing that, I mean, Stephen, I don't know, I always feel like we don't make enough of a big deal about this thing, but whenever people find it, they're always like, this is insane. This blows my mind. And that was a really good example where somebody had found it and connected it to the audio overview feature to get something pretty magical.
Well, I'm tempted to say, welcome to another deep dive, but this time about audio overviews themselves, because I guess that's the one that made NotebookLM go viral across many, many audiences, right? People hearing them, first not even understanding what's so remarkable about it until they learn that those weren't actual people speaking. So, computers have been able to generate voices for decades, actually, but this hits really different. So what is there's not one magic sauce, I guess, but what are the ingredients to create something like audio overviews that's so compelling and real and speaks to people in a very human way?
I actually think the first thing is a mindset. Google has, and most companies have created audio products that are very crisp and very efficient, and they're very exacting. And I've never been particularly happy with them. I just don't really like them personally. Personally, they don't do it for me, What we really wanted to do is we really wanted to make something that just felt very natural and very approachable. I don't know if you've ever, interacted with any of the voice assistants, but I've always felt very kind of tense using them. Like they're very needy, and you've got to be feeding them with quite precise information. And the information they give back, it feels quite on brand. Let's put it that way, Whereas, we wanted to explore, I think a lot of the kind of the insights with audio overviews is really this notion that people learn best when they're feeling comfortable and relaxed, and when they can actually connect in a more emotional way rather than in a purely, kind of logical way to the information. So that was one thing. And then the second thing that I think makes them really magical is an observation that, especially if you're trying to understand something, having information just come at you like a fire hose. If you've ever used, text-to-speech to read a document or something like that, you'll find that the text-to-speech kind of runs ahead of how quickly you can process the information, or at least it does for me. One of the nice things about the way audio reviews come together is it paces the information. There are these natural breaks in the information as it comes at you. And that, I think, gives you and folks like me who can't quite keep up with the TTS machines, it gives us a chance to just catch up with the information itself and kind of stay with it. And so, while it may appear superficially inefficient to introduce ums and ahs and some of the more natural parts of how we all talk, and there's probably a reason that this is probably one of the reasons why we talk like we do.
You're saying you made it better by making it less perfect in a way.
Yeah, it's one of the things that is so magical about the way that they were designed is if you listen to a script of two people talking to each other without those exchanges and ums and talking
Call them
over each
disfluencies,
other,
I think,
disfluencies, right? You can kind of tolerate it a little bit in a single assistant talking to you, although I agree exactly with Simon that there's a limit to that. But if you listen to two people talking that way to each other, like nobody wants to listen to two robots talk to each other. That's not interesting. So you need the disfluencies. And every now and then we'll hear people say like, I love it, but can you turn that stuff down? I don't need all the ums. And I was like, you do. I'm telling you, if you tried to listen to it, the human ear will reject it. Like it's not right. The other thing that I would add to that is, there's a beautiful prompt behind the scenes there that elicits this stuff almost on the content side and less on the audio side, which is before audio overviews came out, I would often tell people when I would do demos, I would say, listen, one of the amazing things you can do with these models now is you can ask for the most interesting things in this material. Like ask the model to go through all the documents and pull out what is the most surprising or interesting. And that was like a search query that you just could not do before. Like you couldn't just say like, find the most interesting things. It would be like, I'm looking for the keyword interesting. And that just wouldn't work. But because these models have a much more nuanced kind of sense of that, it used to work in text chat before we brought in audio overviews. But I think what audio overviews really did was bring that experience to a much larger audience because it was so viral as a phenomenon. And so many people, heard these virtual hosts go through their documents and pull out the interesting bits, build a show around the most interesting things. And Simon had this slogan also, in addition to understand anything, it was make anything interesting.
There's been some examples of sort of mundane things that were actually pretty exciting when they were an audio overview, right?
When we did Hard Fork, Kevin Roos put his credit card statement into it. And I was like, wow, Kevin is taking a lot of Ubers. He really should be using more public transportation in San Francisco. There's perfectly good Muni and BART. I don't understand what his problem is.
You're right. These are also pretty funny scripts, I guess. They have a lot of real-world analogies. How do you sort of create that out of the content that is in the user's notebook?
Yeah, the first thing to say is that it's not only the content in the user's notebook. One of the insights is really that the hosts themselves, they create the experience around the information. And so every host has got a very rich and detailed persona. They're actually role-playing almost as real people. And we found that unless we did that, unless we gave them a very realistic persona, they would fall back on just sounding like the average model. And so we intentionally break them out of post-trained persona, the Gemini persona, and give them these very specific complementary personas that make for an interesting to and fro of information. So that's kind of one component that's almost like the negative space that people don't see. And it's probably the case in podcasts overall, right? Actually, Rachid, you yourself are a personality and you're giving this podcast its own specific flavor. And so we sort of recognize that was a really key component of it. And then the second thing is probably, it's close to what Stephen was saying, the process of writing a really interesting show or a really interesting script. It's not, you don't just kind of come up with it in one go. You have to read this, then you have to make a plan. Then you're like, well, is it all good? You critique it. You're like, well, what can I improve about it? You get feedback on it. And then you maybe go back and address that feedback in another way. So, when they take 5 minutes to generate it, that's not 5 minutes spent on the audio synthesis. That's actually 5 minutes spent on the agents working together to create the script itself. When you push go and you generate one of these things, it's not that you're waiting for it to get queued up and executed. We get to work straight away. And it's literally Gemini working for 5 minutes, turning this thing over, trying to find the right interesting dimensions to really engage you.
So there's basically almost like editors, writers sort of conjured up to make that script.
Rachid, that's exactly right. And it's one of the ways where there was just such a beautiful kind of continuity for the team when the audio overviews team came in, because they were so literary in a way in what they were doing. It was really an edit cycle that they had developed for this thing, which is like come up with a vision, modify the vision, edit the vision, all that stuff that you learn like as a journalist to do or as a writer to do. We were doing on the level of prompts basically. There's an amazing technical achievement that is happening with audio overviews and the quality and the conversational model and what's actually happening with the audio. But there's a kind of classic, almost journalistic edit cycle innovation that's happening there as well. And that, the intersection of those two things, that's the sweet spot of NotebookLM.
So let's talk quickly about two other features that were recently added that were appreciated by a lot of people. Mind maps and the ability to discover new sources, where NotebookLM now goes on the hunt for you to find sources. Where did that idea originate?
Mind maps is one of my favorite stories about the team. It was a weekend project of a new engineer, Cheng Wei, who had just joined our team, who was a big tool for thought maven, really interested in software that augments your ability to remember and organize. And he had this idea of like, maybe we could create this visual representation of all the concepts in your sources. And you could then kind of explore through this kind of map of the ideas rather than just listening to an audio overview or having a chat conversation. So the funny, this is an amazing thing. He built this prototype like over the weekend, came in and showed it to everybody. And just to show that like, while I'm one of the original members of the team, I am often wrong about things. I'd followed mind maps over the years because I'm also interested in that same space. And I always thought they were kind of limited because you were just seeing this visualization of the terms, but there wasn't anything to do with it. So you're like, okay, that's a nice map, but like, how do I really engage with this material? When I first saw it, I was like, oh, that's nice, but that's not going to be a really mainstream use. We should do it, and I'm supportive of, this wonderful new colleague who's gone out of the way to do this passion project. But then I realized that the way he designed it was that each of those little nodes on the map, you can click on,
right,
and it takes you directly back to the chat, and you get a detailed conversation about that particular topic with citations and all the notebook details and stuff like that. And I'd never seen a mind map that was capable of doing that before, because it was really kind of technically impossible to do before you had grounded language models. And once I saw that, I was like, oh, this is genius. Like, this is fantastic. We have to do it. And it's become a big hit. It really, people have absolutely embraced it. It has that same magical feeling of like, I uploaded my journals and I see this completely different representation of that information. And it gives you just a new way in, a new way to explore. So we've been really happy with that one.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, Stephen, me and you were the big cheerleaders for it, right? I think, if I seem to remember, for mind maps. That's such a good feature. I mean, Discover Sources was, similar in terms of it being a single engineer that really kind of made it happen. But it came from the insight of, hey, Notebook's great if you come at it with the sources already to hand. But if you come at Notebook with the desire to understand something, but you don't have the sources yet, what do? It's actually really hard to find them. And so Discover Sources is our V1 in actually, a really interesting roadmap in ways that Notebook can, also help you when you're in that state as well. Actually discover really high quality sources from across the broader internet, I would say, and the digital world to base your session off of.
So longtime listeners of the Made by Google podcast know that we have some sort of a closing tradition where we ask our guests to give the listeners a top tip while they try the product that you've been working on. So what is the one thing you feel people, whether they're new to NotebookLM or maybe advanced users, what is one thing they maybe sort of underappreciate that they really should try and make NotebookLM even more useful to them?
I would give a tip to new users, actually, which is when you're trying to figure out what this is capable of, one of the quickest ways to do that is to just open up Notebook, go to add sources, just go add docs or slides from your Google Drive. And don't even think about organizing it. Just grab the last 15 docs that you have and pull it into the Notebook, and then just start having conversations, generate an audio overview, generate a mind map. And you will see that just by grabbing the last 15 things that you've touched, the AI inside of Notebook suddenly has this very nuanced understanding of where your head has been for like the last 2 weeks on whatever projects you've been working on. And then you can craft your own notebooks on specific projects and cultivate that. But it's a really amazing way to just get a sense of what it's capable of.
Yeah, and I suppose I'll do the other side of that, if that's okay, Stephen. So the other way that you can do this is pick any topic in the news. Anything, any event that's happening around the world. Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what country it is, what language it is. Go and hit Discover Sources. Type in whatever it is that's on your mind. Don't even bother checking, where they're from. Just YOLO all of the sources in and do it for a couple of them. So you've got like 40 things in there, and then generate a mind map. Especially if it's like a sporting event, like I did it for the Formula One recently, you'll just get this huge view of everything that's going on. And it really starts to show you the power of the tool. So that would be my kind of alternative tip to Stephen's.
Amazing. Those are two great tips for users starting out or even people who have been using NotebookLM for a longer time. Great way to explore the product even further. Stephen, Simon, thank you so much for joining the Made by Google podcast. I can see you're having a lot of fun. Simon, I hope you're going to stay a lot longer than just a year and wish you all the best with the upcoming innovations that you'll undoubtedly bring to NotebookLM. Thank you so much.
Cool. Pleasure, Steve.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Made by Google podcast. Don't miss out on new episodes. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts to be the first to listen.